What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Glory UGA podcast, brought to you by our great friends at Alumni Hall. Make sure to check them out for the single best selection of Georgia gear anywhere out there. But after spending the entire summer previewing every single position unit on the Georgia football team, on today's show, I'm going to put it all together with a deep dive into the Georgia offense as I explain why the Dogs will see a resurgence on that side of the football in 2025. But before we get there, guys, I got to start with a huge thank you to all you Georgia diehards who have subscribed to this channel as we've kicked things into high gear really over the last 6 or 7 months. I guess since the 2024 season went final in January. Yeah, we've been doing the audio side things for over a decade, going on our 11th season now, but we really kind of just turned to YouTube over the past year and really kind of kicked it into high gear as we got into January. And now we've hit a milestone of sorts. Like, yeah, very modest numbers relative to like the huge YouTube channels out there. But my goal coming into the summer was to hit 3,000 subscribers on this channel by game one. And not only did we hit that goal last week, we've now blown past it, guys. We're at over 3,200 subscribers and counting right now. So seriously, thank you guys so much for all of your support. This channel really is dedicated to all of you Georgia diehards. That's why I started doing the podcast over a decade ago, and that's why we started this channel, so you guys that are diehards have something that is truly designed for you and not the casual fan. So thank you guys so much for that. And if you are one of those Georgia diehards who's maybe just finding the channel and haven't subscribed yet, I'm setting the new goal. Yeah, we hit a goal. We set a new goal, guys. That's what we do here. New goal at 3,500 subscribers by kickoff week 1 against Marshall. So do me a solid. Yeah, it definitely helps me out as we continue to grow this channel. But also do yourself a solid so you don't miss any of the content that we have planned for all you diehards leading up to the start of the 25 season. And of course, throughout the entire 2025 Georgia football season. So thank you guys for helping me out, and thank you in advance if you have not subscribed yet. But all right, guys, let's talk some Georgia football, shall we? So look, you know what the Georgia offense was a year ago. We've talked about it quite often here over the course of the offseason, but we're going to put it all together here. Last year, let's just be real, guys. Like, let's just pull the Band-Aid off and call it what it was. It was a borderline catastrophe for the Georgia offense in 2024. You know the numbers. I've read them to you. I've gone through them many a time throughout the course of the 8-9 month offseason that we're almost at the end of. But yeah, last year was the worst rushing output of the Kirby Smart era, both from a raw number standpoint, the total rushing yards, and efficiency numbers, yards per rush. It was the worst total offense output for a Kirby Smart offense since year one, back in 2016. It was the worst yards per play output also since year one of the Kirby Smart era, back in 2016. It was the third worst scoring output of the Kirby Smart era, only behind, 2016 and also 2019. Not great. James Cole is the OC that year. It was also one of the least explosive offenses in the entire Kirby Smart era. Basically, what I'm telling you is by any metric that you want to use, the 2024 Georgia offense was a shell of its former self. That's reality. That's what we saw all last year. Yes, there were some isolated moments of lucidity where we saw really good play from the Georgia offense, but those were few and far between a year ago. And of course, when that is the case, when you see that type of drop-off from the Georgia offense, of course, the offensive coordinator, Mike Bobo, is going to bear the brunt of that criticism. So let's go ahead, guys. Let's, off the top here, address that elephant in the room. And look, I really do not want this to devolve into a Mike Bobo thing. Is he good? Does he suck? Like, that conversation has just had far too often in the Georgia fan base. I know, guys. I'm going to dive into a little bit here to explain why I think the Georgia offense will be improved in 2025, even with Mike Bobo as our coordinator. But I really don't want this to devolve into like the Bobo supporters versus the Bobo haters, because that just, look, like, we're on the same page. We're all Georgia guys and gals out there. We're on the same page here. But I do think it is important to start with the guy running the offense. If I'm trying to explain to you why I believe the Georgia offense will be significantly improved in 2025, we got to start with the guy running the show, right? It just kind of makes too much sense there. Now, I will say the criticism I know there's a lot of Bobo haters out there in the fan base, or Bobo doubters, whatever you want to call yourself. I know you're out there, and I will readily admit that the criticism of Bobo last year certainly is fair to a degree. Of course, like when the offense was as bad as it was a year ago, the buck ultimately does stop with the guy calling the plays, right? Now, do I think there were some things outside of his control that certainly affected our productivity offensively? Yes, I do, but there are certainly areas that he can improve, as I've mentioned several times for the offseason. I know this is a common refrain for me going back to last season and even a little bit in 2023. I think for me, the primary area where Mike Bobo can improve is not play calling like a lot of the Bobo haters out there think, and they call him predictable and all of that kind of stuff. To me, it's personnel utilization, taking the talent on hand and utilize them in a way that maximizes what they bring to the table and what their skill set is. I don't think we did a great job of that last year. I really don't. So I think that's something that can certainly improve in 2025. I would also like to see our run schemes be modernized. I think that they're antiquated to a degree. And I know, like, guys, the way our offense is structured, like the game planning, Bobo, like, yeah, he calls the plays and he does oversee everything. So yeah, the buck does stop with him. But we also have a run game coordinator who is responsible for kind of putting a lot of those schemes together. Bobo does get the ultimate, I guess, veto power over that. So it's not just him, but regardless, we've got to modernize our run schemes. I think there are some things that we can take advantage of from a misdirection standpoint that we don't often take advantage of, that other teams do, and that's a big reason why they are more effective than us running the football, at least last year. So I do think there are some clear areas where he can improve. But I also don't think it's all on him. I know that there is a segment of the Georgia fan base who wants to pin everything that the offense does and all of its struggles directly on Mike Bobo, and people that are convinced that as long as he is our offense coordinator, we're going to see a lot of the same from the Georgia offense, and there's not much hope for any sort of improvement. But I do also think it's fair to ask the question, were our offensive struggles a year ago, as plentiful as they were they really a function of Mike Bobo? Is it really as simple as saying Mike Bobo just isn't up to the job and that there's no hope for the Georgia offense to improve in 2025? Because let's not forget, guys, I think this gets lost in the conversation sometimes. It wasn't all that long ago, 2 short years ago, 1 year prior to that disaster of an offensive performance a year ago, that the Georgia offense was not just good, but was elite. It was, guys, top 5 nationally, essentially across the board. Whatever metric you want to throw out there, you name it, essentially top 5 across the board. And in 2023, the Bobo haters were real quiet because what did you have to argue with? I guess we fell short in the SEC title game, but you also had Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers each on one leg, barely able to move out there. But 2023 was awesome, guys. Offensively, we were one of the, if not the best offenses in the entire SEC. We were right up there in that conversation. And Mike Bobo coordinated that offense, did that with an offense that was without Brock Bowers, the only 2-time Mackey Award winner in the history of college football, who's now tearing up the NFL. Is going to be was an All-Pro last year, be an All-Pro, a perennial All-Pro. Brock Bowers, generational guy, had him for half the year in 2023. Ladd McConkey, who wasn't quite a first-round draft pick, but probably should have been, was like a fringe first-round guy and is already doing huge things starting in the NFL. We had a big-time rookie year, just like Brock Bowers did. And those guys were kind of hurt at different times in the year. Both of them missed at various points of the season. When you add up all the games they missed, half the year for Georgia, right? We had to take we were so banged up at running back that we had to take a wide receiver, Dylan Bell, and turn him into like a part-time running back. We had a first-time starter. He had been in the system for a long time, but a first-time starter at quarterback in Carson Beck. So he was that productive in 2023 despite all those factors kind of working against him. And look, guys, I know. For the people who are anti-Mike Bobo, I know none of that context matters. I know that nothing I say, that no evidence I throw out there will ever convince you that he is anything other than like the worst offensive coordinator, not just in Georgia history, but like the worst offensive coordinator that Georgia could possibly ever hire. I think there's a lot of people out there that made up their mind about Mike Bobo back in 2008 and just are entrenched in that position and will not let the man evolve in any way and will not allow for any sort of improvement. But the reality is, guys, and again, I don't mean this as a shot at anybody. We're on the same page. Like, we're the same team, guys. We're dogs, right? But the reality is, from a statistical standpoint, right? Now, I know the argument's going to be, well, isolated plays here, isolated plays there. But from a statistical standpoint, you can actually make a really strong argument that Mike Bobo is the best offensive coordinator that Georgia football has ever had. You can make the argument. All right, I'll leave it up to you whether you want to make that argument, but that argument can be made from a statistical standpoint. And I know the retort to that is like, well, Tyler, Todd Monken. Like, Todd Monken exists out there. How can you possibly say Mike Bobo is in the conversation for best Georgia OC ever when Todd Monken is still a man that lives on this earth? I hear you. Todd Monken was fan-freaking-tastic. Love the guy. I wish he'd stayed here forever, no doubt. But when we're talking about Mike Bobo or anything to do with Georgia football, college football in general, let's make sure that we're speaking in verifiable facts here, right? And we're not beholden to opinions and perceptions that were formed 15 or so years ago. Because if you take Mike Bobo's last 3 years at Georgia under Mark Richt, 2012, 2013, 2014, and you compare that to the 3-year run that Todd Monken had at Georgia from 2021 and 22, here's what you get when you average those numbers out. So Todd Monken from 2020 through 2022, and I will say, caveat here, 2020 COVID year, didn't have a chance to work with the offense coming into that year much, right, on the field as much as you normally would. And you're playing an all SEC schedule, so there is that. I will certainly recognize that. But if we're going from a 3-year span, so Monken's 3 years, Bobo's last 3 years at Georgia under Mark Richt, Monken in his 3-year run averaged 456 yards per game offensively, 6.7 yards per play, 37.3 points per game. What about Mike Bobo, 2012 through 2014? Well, Mike Bobo's offenses, those last 3 years at Georgia under Richt, averaged 464 yards per game, 6.6 yards per play, 37.8 points per game. So about 10-ish yards or so more per game than Monken averaged in his 3 years. A tenth of a yard away from where Monken was. So Monken was 6.7 yards per play in his 3 years. Bobo last 3 years under Richt, 6.6. And 0.5 of a point more than Monken over his 3 years. So I'm not here to tell you that Bobo is better than Monken necessarily. My point is, it ain't that far off from a statistical standpoint. Now, the 2022 Georgia offense was the single best offense in Georgia football history, full stop. And that was Todd Monken running that offense. No doubt. Monken was incredible. He was awesome. Love the guy. I'm not here to bash Monken. I'm not trying to lift Bobo up by bashing Monken. No. My argument is, like, there has really not that much of a drop-off except for last year, which we're going to get to, guys. We're going to get there. But while the 2022 offense under Monken was the best offense in Georgia history, undeniably, over 500 yards per game, 7.17 yards per play that season. Actually, I got it right here. 7.17 yards per play, 41.1 points per game. That was the best offense in Georgia history. But, again, statistically speaking, Mike Bobo has coordinated the number 2 and number 3 offenses in Georgia history. I look at it, I would argue that the number 3 offense in Georgia football history is back in 2012. And that year we averaged 467 yards per game, 6.9 yards per play, 37.2 points per game. And then number 2, obviously not last year, disaster. I'm not trying to get around that. That was a disastrous offensive performance last year. But number 2 would be 2023, guys. In 2023, we averaged more yards per play than any Georgia offense in the history of the program. Over 100 years, okay? That was just 2 short years ago with this same program, with the same offensive coordinator. And look, I'm not telling you the guy's perfect. I'm not telling you he's above reproach. He's not. There are areas that I would like to see him improve. It's not as though all criticisms of Mike Bobo are without merit. But if the question is, can Mike Bobo coordinate an elite offense? The answer is clearly, from a statistical standpoint, emphatically, yes, he can. And I'm throwing all of this at you. Again, I know I'm kind of like, I'm breaking my own rule. I'm kind of bringing up this whole Bobo thing all over again. I know. But I'm throwing this all at you. I'm bringing this all up to say that we have verifiable evidence over the course of a number of years to support the idea that Mike Bobo can absolutely get the job done at Georgia. And not only get the job done, but get the job done at as high of a level as it has been done ever at the University of Georgia. And he will not be an obstacle as many think he will, because anytime I talk about the Georgia offense being improved in 2025, I get this comment so many times, whether it's comments on YouTube, whether it's comments on social media. It's like, well, is Mike Bobo still the coordinator? Yeah, I thought so. I get that all the time. But I don't, as I just laid out for you, I do not believe, because I think we have evidence to tell us that he will not be an obstacle to a Georgia offensive resurgence in 2025. So I just got to start there, guys. I had to address the elephant in the room because I know what the haters will say. If I ignored the Bobo part of this and just went, hey, here, X and O Y's here, X and O Y's there, here's why I think the Georgia offense will be improved, the response will be, well, Mike Bobo. So I had to address that off the top here. But if Mike Bobo was not really the problem last year, again, I think there are some things that he could have done better last year, certainly. But if it wasn't a full-on Mike Bobo problem last year, and that's just the answer, it was nothing else, it was just Bobo, there were no extenuating circumstances, well, what was the problem last year? If it's not Bobo, what was the issue? Because something was wrong. Something went haywire between 23 and 24. So what was it? How do you account for that dramatic fall off from 24 to 23? Well, I've boiled it down to essentially 4 factors, okay? You can say 5 if you want to throw Bobo in some areas where I think you can improve from a personnel utilization standpoint, the run scheme things, all those. But outside of Bobo making some improvements, I think injuries on the offensive line were a significant hindrance to our offensive production a year ago, as I've stated many times throughout this offseason, which obviously made it difficult for us to run the football. That's number 2. Number 3, we just had a general lack of explosiveness and playmaking ability at the receiver position. And then number 4, I would call it erratic quarterback play, because it wasn't as though we never got good quarterback play. It was kind of just a situation where game in and game out, you just never knew what you were going to get from Carson Beck, right? So those are the 4 areas that I've identified as being problematic for Georgia last year, and the explanation for why we saw this dramatic decline in offensive production from 23 to 24. But here's the good news, guys. I firmly believe that all 4 of those areas that conspired to bring down the Georgia offense a year ago will be dramatically improved in 2025. And as a result, the Georgia offense as a whole will be dramatically improved in 2025. So let's take each one of those factors one by one and kind of just run through why I think Georgia will be better in those areas and why they won't be an issue for Georgia, at least not as much, in 2025. So let's start with the injuries here. And yes, on the offensive line, ostensibly, as many a rival fan will tell you out there, Georgia is losing 4 starters from the offensive line a year ago, at least the projected offensive line a year ago. Several of which are likely, it looks like at this point, to start in the NFL. Looks like Tate Ratledge is probably going to have a starting job. Jared Wilson doing some good things, certainly in contention there. Dylan Fairchild as well. Several of those guys are not only on rosters in the NFL, but have a legit shot to start. So if that's the case, how can I possibly argue the Georgia offensive line will be better, will be improved in 2025? Seems kind of contradictory, right? Doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Well, what you have to understand when you're comparing the 24 Georgia O-line with the 25 O-line that we're going to see this year is we aren't comparing a fully healthy 2024 Georgia offensive line to the 2025 Georgia offensive line. If Tate Ratledge and Jared Wilson and Fairchild and the whole bunch, all 5 of those guys were healthy every game last year and never missed any time. They were practicing every week, every practice, and we're 100% all year long, yes, that offensive line would be better than the offensive line that Georgia is going to field this year. But that wasn't the case, guys. We started the same 5 on the offensive line in only 3 games last year. You've heard me talk about this all offseason, guys. And not only like when Tate Ratledge and Jerry Wilson got back, yeah, okay, they're back. They're not missing games after a while, but they're not fully healthy. They're a shell of the healthy version of them that we would normally get, right? So the offensive line, yeah, it wasn't good enough last year, but the injuries were, in my opinion, the biggest contributing factor to that, okay? So if we can stay healthy on the offensive line this year, and that's an if, I don't know, man. Like the last 2 seasons, we've had this just crazy run of injuries, like real injuries to serious big-time players for us. But it's hard to imagine. Like you never know, but it's hard to imagine that we'll have the same horrific injury luck at the same spot another year. I hope that's not the case. So if we can stay healthy, even though we are working into some newcomers, there's reason to believe that we can see improved offensive line play from what we saw a year ago because we have dudes that are healthy. Fingers crossed. And we also have more experience coming back than people want to give us credit for. I know, yeah, we're losing 4 starters. You could say that, but we also return like 4 guys with starting experience. You return Ernest Green. Yes, he's moving from left to right tackle, but he's going into like essentially his 3rd year as a starter. Monroe Freeling started the back half of last year for us at left tackle. Drew Bobo got a spot start last year. Micah Morris started a couple games for us when Tate Ratledge was out before he got injured. So we have a number of guys that have started games for us. Have they been like multi-year stars outside of Ernest Green? No, but they've played a lot of ball for Georgia, and some of these guys have, I think, maybe higher potential than some of the guys that were on the offensive line for us a year ago. I also think we have more depth. I think we have more guys that are ready to help us on the offensive line if we have guys go down with injuries. So I do think there's legitimate reason to believe the Georgia offensive line will be improved this year, and the injury situation will be better from a year ago. And if that's the case, guys, that is obviously going to have a direct impact on our ability to get back to running the football like Georgia football is supposed to run the freaking football. And I know I have broken this down multiple times this offseason, so I am going to keep this part relatively short. If you want a more detailed breakdown on why I believe our run game will be improved in 2025, you can go back and check out an episode I did about a month ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, where I dove in directly to the run game and detailed why I'm convinced the run game will be improved for Georgia this year. So go check that out if you want a more detailed take on that. But real quickly here, for some people who haven't seen that, for some of our newer listeners, I do genuinely believe that the Georgia ground game will be much better in 2025 than it was a year ago. Because last year was an anomaly, guys. Like for the entire offense at large, it was an anomaly, but certainly when it came to us just falling off the face of the earth in terms of running the football. That was not Georgia football, right? We have a healthier offensive line, at least coming into the season. Fingers crossed, hope it stays that way. We have a deeper backfield. So if we have some injuries at the running back position like we had last year with Trevor Etienne missing almost half the year as our starting running back, we have more guys when you talk about not only Nate Frazier at the top there, but you got Bo Walker as a freshman doing huge things in the spring, huge things in fall camp. You got Illinois' leading rusher coming over this year, and Josh McCray. He was a little bit sick to start camp, but he's good now. You got Rod Robinson, who's come back looking like he's healthy. Dwight Phillips Jr. has gotten a little bit bigger there. Of course, you got Cash Jones. Chauncey Bowens had the biggest day of any running back out there at the first fall scrimmage. So we are just deeper with guys that are ready to help us at the running back position than we were a year ago. Then on top of that, we now have a quarterback, unlike Carson Beck from a year ago, who is a legitimate factor in the run game. Why does that matter? Well, it affects numbers, right? That will reduce the number of snaps where we are outnumbered in the box, where you have free runners, unblocked defenders making plays in the ball carrier because we can't account for them in the run game, in the run count. Right? We have a quarterback that can run the football. They got to account for him. You can now option off other defenders, backside defensive ends, front side defensive ends, linebackers, you name it. And that creates a numbers edge, allows us to take the advantage back from the defenses, which we just couldn't do last year because we didn't have a quarterback that could run the football. I also believe, as I'm about to dive into, that we will be much more explosive in the vertical passing game, which will make it more difficult for defenses to roll the dice and load the box in the first place, because I think we are more equipped to make them pay with those vertical kill shots down the field than we were a year ago with a quarterback who's more accurate down the field and more playmakers with explosiveness on the outside. Which leads me to that next factor. I do think that we will be far more explosive this year. Offensively, certainly the receiver position. I think perhaps, and I know there were a lot of issues for the Georgia offense a year ago. There were a lot. There's more than one. But for me, perhaps the most glaring of those weaknesses was just the general lack of playmaking ability on the outside at the receiver position. Yes, I know Arian Smith is a burner. He can run really fast, but you got to catch the football. Can you get open consistently? These are questions you have, right? So I think that was a major weakness for us. We just didn't really have a lot of guys that scared teams. That's why they were able to roll safeties in the box, play with a single high safety look on us, and play some man coverage on the outside because they didn't think that we could threaten them. They weren't scared, right? They didn't respect us. That's what it comes down to. And that affected how they played us, and then ultimately it affected our offensive production. It made it more difficult for us to score. It made it more difficult for us to run the football. It made it more difficult for us to do anything offensively. So upgrading that room for me, and I think also for Kirby Smart, if you see how we attacked it early in the offseason, that had to be priority number one, upgrading that room coming to the offseason, whether it's from the portal, recruiting, whatever it was. And I think personally we've hit a home run in that regard. We saw it during the spring. The wide receiver room has been the talk of fall camp. I mean, I just did an episode early this week kind of giving you some scrimmage intel. And if you missed that, guys, I mean, I named 4 guys that have been consistently mentioned in the conversations that I've had as guys that are doing big things out there at the wide receiver position between Colby Young doing some big things. It's been Zachariah Branch recently. Noah Thomas is off to a hot start, still doing big things. Talon Taylor is a freshman. Like, we have a ton of guys that are doing big things out there at camp. We have 2 transfers, and Noah Thomas and Zachariah Branch, who I think are going to be awesome for us this year, have taken turns wowing in camp right now. I think we have arguably the best freshman recruiting class that we've ever brought in Georgia history. We'll see, like, when they get on the field, but on paper, it looks pretty good, guys. And the returns during the spring and early part of fall camp are also very strong there. Those freshman guys like Talon Taylor and C.J. Wiley are going to play for Georgia and make an impact immediately. And I also think we have guys at receiver that complement each other. I think we have big bodies on the outside that can go up and win the 50-50 ball. Guys like Colby Young and Noah Thomas. Then you got the speedier guys, explosive guys. Not that Colby and Noah can't be explosive. They can. But you got the Zachariah Branches of the world. You got the Jeremy Bells of the world. You've got the London Humphreys on the outside as well that brings some explosiveness to the offense as well. So I do think that's going to make it a lot harder on defenses to roll the dice, roll safeties in the box, and play us one-on-one on the outside. If you try to do that, all I'm going to say for you is good luck. Last year, yeah, a lot of success doing that against Georgia. This year, good luck. Try it. And let's see what happens. Let's see what happens this year. But I do think we're going to see increased explosiveness. That will also improve the run game. And what does that all lead to? It all leads to increased scoring and increased overall production on the offensive side of the football. So I think that'll be a huge shot in the arm for the Georgia offense in 2025. And finally here, the last factor that I do think was sort of an albatross at times around the neck of the Georgia offense a year ago was the erratic play we got from the quarterback position. Now, this is the one area of the 4 that I've kind of gone through here where I still think there's more questions here than the other 3. I'm really confident we're going to be healthier on the offensive line. I'm very confident we're going to run the ball better. I know we have more playmakers out wide. We're going to be more explosive in the pass game. I feel very confident with that. Will the quarterback play be less erratic? I certainly think so, but I'm maybe not as confident as I am in the other 3 because we haven't seen as much of Gunnar Stockton in these settings, like playing football in the SEC as the starter for the University of Georgia. And look, I know right now that Carson Beck is not doing himself any favors with some of the comments that he's made in interviews over the past couple of weeks leading up to the start of the season. I really don't want to make this a pile-on Carson Beck thing. I know we've been there. We've done that. Like, I know. Like, for me, like, he's gone. I just don't care about him anymore. Like, whatever he says, like, okay, it doesn't affect me. Whatever. But objectively speaking, the dude was wildly erratic last year at the quarterback position. He was awesome in 22 or 23. 24, man, I don't know. I don't know what happened. I still can't quite fully make sense of. I know the receivers, didn't help him. Certainly, the injuries on the offensive line didn't help, but there were also some things that he did to himself. It's like, man, like, you just weren't doing these things a year ago. And he was, guys, like, objectively was a real factor in why we lost the 2 games that we lost. He didn't lose those games alone against Alabama and Ole Miss. He didn't lose them alone in the regular season, but he was certainly a factor in that, right? A little bit more accurate ball at the end down there against Alabama, ball's probably not picked. We might score there and win the game because Colby had a step, but ball wasn't put on him there. So he was a factor in why we lost some of those games. He's also a factor in why we almost lost a few more games that we had no business almost losing, like, beating a horrifically terrible Kentucky team by 1 point when Carson Beck just went into a shell and just was like, it's like PTSD out there. I don't know. I still don't know what happened in that game, man. It's crazy. Almost lost that game. I think largely because he, in the first half, refused to turn the ball loose when we dialed up plays down the field for him to turn the ball loose based on how they were playing us. But in fairness, we got to also be fair here. While he did hurt us in some games, no doubt, there were also games that we probably don't win without Carson Beck. We probably don't beat Tennessee without Carson Beck last year. I don't know if we come back and beat Georgia Tech without Carson Beck, right? So while he did hurt us in some games, he also was a big reason why we won some of those bigger games on our schedule as well. And that's what I'm talking about. That's the moral of the story here. Erratic quarterback play, right? I'm not saying he was terrible all year. There were moments where it was like enlightened play from Carson Beck, but there's also moments of what on earth are you possibly doing, right? And that was problematic. That was the issue. It was the erratic quarterback play. And, it was really just come down to you just didn't know, like I said at the beginning of the show, you didn't know what you were going to get from Carson Beck. From game to game, drive to drive, play to play, you just didn't quite know what you were going to get. The body language was just bad last year, guys. And at times, especially the Kentucky game always comes to mind for me, had that in Ole Miss as well, had that deer in the headlights look in him that you just didn't see back in 2023. His 12 interceptions were the most among full-time quarterbacks in the SEC a year ago. And those 12 interceptions were the fourth most among all full-time FBS quarterbacks last year. So that was a problem. That was a problem. You don't know what you're going to get, and you can't fully trust your quarterback to not turn the football over and kill you offensively. So here we are going into 2025. We're going from that to a player in Gunnar Stockton at quarterback who I believe at the very least will bring more stability to the Georgia offense. As I've been saying all offseason, I'll stick to this, guys, because this is what I truly believe. I don't know. I know you want me to know and you want me to tell you what's going to be like because I run this channel, I run this podcast, but I don't know if Gunnar Stockton has Carson Beck's ceiling. I don't know. Carson Beck, the best of Carson Beck was really good, guys. Really good. We just didn't always get that last year. Again, you never know what you were going to get. I just don't know if I've seen enough of Gunnar in real live situations where the bullets are flying to say his ceiling is the same as Carson Beck. I'm open to the possibility. It very well may be the case. His ceiling might be higher than Carson Beck's. I just can't say that yet because I haven't seen enough, right? Objectively speaking. But here's what I do feel comfortable saying about Gunnar Stockton and why I do think he'll help us in terms of the erratic play we got from that position a year ago. Carson was a guy last year that was up and down, man. He was riding that wave, highs and lows, right? Gunnar's not a guy that I think is going to ride that wave. I don't know if his highs are going to be as high as Carson Beck's, but I don't think his lows are going to be as low as we saw from Carson Beck a year ago. I can confidently tell you we're not going to see the same body language from Gunnar Stockton. Because he's going to make mistakes, guys, like every quarterback does. The best of them, they all make mistakes. But when he makes mistakes, you're not going to see the type of body language that you saw from Carson Beck a year ago where you let one play affect the next play and now it just kind of snowballs on you. Gunnar's not going to be perfect. He's not. That's an unreasonable expectation for any quarterback, certainly a guy going to his first full year as a starter. He won't be perfect. He's going to throw interceptions. And again, those highs might not be as high. Maybe not. Maybe. I mean, can't say for sure they won't be, but it's really possible that they won't be. But what I do believe is that you will see steadier play from the quarterback position this year with Gunnar Stockton. And if you combine that with the influx of weapons around him that I went through at receiver, at tight end as well, brought on some guys, at running back, a healthier offensive line, fingers crossed, let's hope it stays that way. Also, his ability to run the football and open up the pass game, open up the run game. What do you have? Now you have a recipe for a much improved Georgia offense in 2025. So guys, that is why I believe that the Georgia offense will see a resurgence this year and will get back being much closer to what it was in 2023. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be equal to or surpass the 23 offense, because that was one of the two best offenses in Georgia football history, but I think it'll be much closer to that type of production than what we saw a year ago. So that's why I'm the Georgia offense, guys, and it's got me excited about this 2025 season, which will kick off here in a few short weeks, and we'll find out. We'll find out if I'm right, if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll come back here and own it, guys. You know, if you've been doing this podcast for as long as I have, you say a lot of things, you get some right, you get some wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'll own it. And I know not everyone agrees, so let me know what you think, guys. Do you think the offense will be improved in 2025, or am I like out of my mind here, man? Is that the case? I know, and I know there's some of you guys out there that are not Bobo guys, and you probably have some strong thoughts about some things that I said, but let me know, guys. Let me know. Love to hear from you guys, and I'll try to respond to as many of those as I can. But thank you so much for being here, guys. And again, thank you to all of you who have subscribed to the channel. Guys, it's a huge help, man. Like, I work hard here on this channel, and it's very much appreciated. I promise you guys, the support is very much appreciated. So thank you guys for that. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and do that right now. I don't think you diehard fans will regret that. Like the video, comment, all that. Thank you. I'm Tyler, and as always, go Dogs!